There is a promise whispered in the world of finance, a secret passed down not in complex algorithms or frantic day trading forums, but in the quiet, patient accumulation of wealth. It's a promise of certainty in a world defined by chaos. It's the idea that you could buy a piece of a business, lock the certificate away in a vault, and return a decade later to find not just a survivor but a titan, a wealth-generating machine that has worked for you tirelessly, silently, every single day. Warren Buffett, the architect of modern value investing, gave these rare creatures a name. He called them the inevitables. These are not companies that ride the wave of a fleeting trend. They are the wave itself. They are businesses so deeply embedded in the fabric of human life, so dominant in their markets, and so protected by impenetrable moats that their continued success is as close to a law of nature as you can find in the world of commerce. Their growth isn't tied to the next quarter's earnings report or a breakthrough in speculative technology. It's tied to the rising tide of global population, the expansion of the middle class, and the simple, unchanging desires that have driven human beings for centuries. To want a refreshing drink on a hot day, to feel the pride and security of a trusted brand, to move goods from one side of a continent to the other. Understanding this principle is the ultimate defense against the single most costly mistake an investor can make, the siren song of the new, the exciting, and the temporary. We are wired to chase fads, to believe that the company with the futuristic name and the incomprehensible product holds the key to overnight riches. We buy into stories of disruption and revolution, forgetting that for every true revolution, there are 1,000 failed rebellions that leave investors' portfolios in ruins. These temporary advantages, these flashes of brilliance, create thrilling charts that go up, but they lack the deep roots necessary to withstand the inevitable storms of economic cycles, technological shifts, and brutal competition. They are built on sand, the inevitables are built on bedrock. The financial transformation that occurs when you grasp this concept is profound. It is a shift from speculation to ownership, from gambling to partnership. You stop asking what stock will go up next week, and you start asking what business will be larger, more profitable, and more dominant 10, 20, 50 years from now. This framework allows you to build a core portfolio, a financial fortress of ultra-high-quality stocks that you can hold with supreme confidence, not for months, but for a lifetime. It allows the eighth wonder of the world, compound interest, to work its silent, relentless magic. This isn't about finding the next hot stock. It's about finding the next certain one. It is the simplest, most reliable, and most powerful path to true and lasting financial freedom. And it all begins with understanding the first, most powerful pillar of an inevitable, the unassailable fortress of a dominant brand. The year is 1988. The stock market is still nursing a brutal hangover from the Black Monday crash of October 1987, a day when the Dow Jones Industrial Average plummeted by more than 22% in a single session. Fear was the dominant emotion on Wall Street. Investors who had been burned were skittish, questioning the very foundations of stock ownership. The consensus was to be cautious, to seek safety in bonds, to wait for the smoke to clear. But in Omaha, Nebraska, Warren Buffett was doing the opposite of waiting. He was preparing to make one of the largest single investments of his life, a move that seemed, to the outside world, both simplistic and audacious. He was buying Coca-Cola. A lot of it. Between 1988 and 1989, Berkshire Hathaway would accumulate shares in the beverage giant, ultimately investing over $1 billion, which at the time represented a massive portion of Berkshire's entire portfolio. To understand the genius of this move, you have to transport yourself back to that moment. Technology stocks were the darlings of the forward-thinking investor. The personal computer revolution was underway. People were talking about microprocessors and software. And here was Buffett, the supposed oracle, pouring a fortune into a company that sold sugar water, a product that had been around for 100 years. To many, it looked like a hopelessly old-fashioned, backward-looking decision. They saw a mature company in a boring industry. Buffett saw an absolute economic monarchy, an inevitable. The story begins not in an investment committee meeting, but in a corner store in Omaha decades earlier. Buffett had been a customer his entire life. He'd seen firsthand how people behaved around the product. He observed that no one ever went into a store and said, "I'll have a cola." They said, "I'll have a Coke." That simple linguistic fact was, to him, an indicator of a moat deeper and wider than any patent or factory. The brand name itself had become the generic term for the entire category. He did the math, of course. He saw a company that was expanding its international footprint at a staggering rate. He looked at the per capita consumption of Coke in the United States, and then looked at the per capita consumption in the rest of the world and saw a vast, untapped ocean of growth. If the rest of the world could be persuaded to drink just a fraction of the Coke that Americans did, the company's earnings would explode. But the core of his thesis wasn't just in the numbers on a spreadsheet, it was in what he called share of mind. Coca-Cola didn't just occupy shelf space in a supermarket. It occupied a piece of real estate in the minds of billions of people across the planet. It was associated with happiness, with refreshment, with celebrations, with America itself. This mental real estate was its most valuable asset, and it didn't even appear on the balance sheet. While other companies had to spend fortunes on advertising just to get customers to remember their name, Coca-Cola's advertising simply reinforced a connection that was already deeply embedded in global culture. Buffett famously illustrated this by asking people to imagine they were given $100 billion and tasked with unseating Coca-Cola as the world's #1 soft drink. How would you do it? You could build bigger bottling plants, you could design a slicker logo, you could even, perhaps, create a drink that narrowly won in blind taste tests. But could you erase a century of memories? Could you replace the brand that was present at the end of World War II, at family picnics, at first dates, at movie theaters across generations? You couldn't. The fortress was too strong. The cost to replicate that share of mind was effectively infinite. This was the essence of an inevitable brand. He wasn't just buying a company that sold a product. He was buying a small piece of the collective human consciousness. He knew that in 10, 20, or 50 years, the world would be unrecognizably different. We might be driving flying cars or communicating via brain implants, but he was willing to bet his fortune that on a hot day, a significant portion of the human race would still want a cold Coke. That fundamental, simple reality was the bedrock of his billion-dollar investment, an investment that has since returned dividends and capital gains that are almost impossible to calculate, cementing it as one of the greatest trades in the history of long-term investing. The reason Buffett's bet on Coca-Cola was so profoundly successful isn't just a matter of good business analysis. It's rooted in a deep, intuitive understanding of human psychology. He was exploiting, or rather aligning his investment strategy with, a set of powerful cognitive biases that govern our choices every single day. The primary psychological principle at play is what psychologists Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky called the availability heuristic. This is a mental shortcut our brains use to judge the likelihood of an event based on how easily examples of it come to mind. When a brand name is so ubiquitous, so ever-present in our environment, our brain equates that availability with quality, importance, and trustworthiness. Think about it. You see the Coca-Cola logo on vending machines, on trucks driving down the highway, in movies, at sporting events, on billboards in Times Square and in tiny villages in rural India. When you're thirsty and standing in front of a cooler filled with dozens of options, Coke is not just an option. It's often the default, the path of least cognitive resistance. Your brain doesn't have to perform a complex analysis of price per ounce or ingredient lists. It simply reaches for the familiar, the one that comes to mind first. Coca-Cola has spent over a century and billions of dollars ensuring that its name is the most readily available answer to the question, what should I drink? This isn't just marketing, it's cerebral engineering. This connects to another powerful force, social proof. We are social creatures. hardwired to look to others for cues on how to behave, especially in situations of uncertainty. When we see a brand that is consumed and trusted by billions of people around the world, our brain interprets this as a massive signal of safety and quality. If everyone else is drinking it, it must be good, it must be safe, it must be the right choice. This creates a self-reinforcing loop. The more people who drink Coke, the more visible it becomes, which in turn provides more social proof, encouraging even more people to drink it. A dominant brand like Coke is the ultimate form of social proof. It transcends a mere product and becomes a cultural artifact, a shared experience that connects us to a larger group. Choosing Coke is an unconsciously tribal decision. It's a low-risk way to affirm your membership in the global consumer community. Finally, there is the deep-seated psychological principle of loss aversion. Research has shown that the pain of losing something is psychologically about twice as powerful as the pleasure of gaining the equivalent amount. In the context of consumer choice, this means we are often more motivated by avoiding a bad decision than by making an optimal one. When you buy a lesser-known or generic brand of cola, there's a small but real risk of disappointment. It might taste strange, be flat, or just not deliver the expected satisfaction. When you buy a Coca-Cola, that risk is virtually zero. You know exactly what you're going to get, every single time, anywhere in the world. The brand acts as a powerful guarantee, an insurance policy against the small pain of a disappointing purchase. This consistency is the bedrock of trust. Buffett understood that this psychological safety net was worth a massive premium. He wasn't just buying a formula and a distribution network, he was buying certainty, a product that had effectively eliminated the fear of buyer's remorse for its customers. This combination, mental availability, overwhelming social proof, and the elimination of perceived risk, creates a psychological moat that is far more durable than any patent or regulatory advantage. It's a fortress built not of bricks and mortar, but of synapses and habits in the minds of billions. So how can you, as an investor dedicated to long-term investing and wealth building, translate this powerful concept into a practical tool for your own portfolio growth? How do you create a blueprint for identifying these inevitable brands? It begins with a mental model we can call the global teenager test. The process is simple but incredibly revealing. First, create a list of potential investment candidates, companies with well-known brand names. Now, for each company, perform a thought experiment. Imagine a 15-year-old living in 5 different, vastly diverse locations: a bustling apartment in Tokyo, a rural village in Brazil, a wealthy suburb of Chicago, a crowded neighborhood in Lagos, and a modern flat in Stockholm. Step 2. For each company on your list, ask yourself a series of brutally honest questions. Will this teenager not only recognize the brand but also have a strong, positive emotional connection to it? Does the brand represent something aspirational, a piece of a global culture they want to be a part of? Question 3, and this is the most critical. Is it highly probable that this teenager 20 years from now will be passing down their preference for this brand to their own children? If the answer is a resounding yes across all or most of these diverse cultural contexts, you have likely identified the seed of an inevitable brand. A brand that passes this test, think Nike, Apple, McDonald's, or Coca-Cola, has achieved a level of cultural penetration that transcends borders, languages, and economic cycles. It has become part of the global lexicon. The second part of the blueprint is the pricing power audit. This is where you move from the qualitative to the quantitative. Go back 10 or 20 years and look at the company's flagship product. Find out what its average selling price was then and what it is today. Then, compare that price increase to the cumulative rate of inflation over the same period. An inevitable brand will have a history of consistently raising its prices at a rate equal to, or, more importantly, greater than inflation without any meaningful loss of market share. This is the ultimate proof of a brand's strength. It means the company is not a price taker, subject to the whims of the market and raw material costs. It is a price maker, Its customers are willing to absorb price increases because the value they derive from the brand, the trust, the status, the consistency, is worth more than the marginal extra cost. When you find a company that has demonstrated this power for decades, you have found a business that can protect your investment from the corrosive effects of inflation, a key component of any successful retirement planning strategy. Finally, apply the verb test. This is the simplest and perhaps most powerful filter of all. Does the company's brand name get used as a verb in everyday language? People don't say, "I'm going to search for that online." They say, "I'm going to Google it." They don't say, "Let's have a video conference." They say, "Let's Zoom." They might ask for a Kleenex, not a tissue, or put a Band-Aid on a cut, not an adhesive bandage. When a brand achieves this level of linguistic dominance, it has reached the pinnacle of mental real estate. It signifies that the company is no longer just a participant in a market. It defines the market. This is the holy grail for high-quality stocks. By systematically applying this three-part framework, the Global Teenager Test for Cultural Durability, the Pricing Power Audit for Financial Strength, and the Verb Test for Ultimate Market Dominance, you move beyond simple stock picking. You begin to think like Buffett, identifying the true economic fortresses that can serve as the bedrock for a lifetime of compound interest and a secure path to financial freedom. To truly appreciate the wisdom of investing in these branded fortresses, we must examine the opposite approach, the path that the vast majority of investors take, often to their own detriment. This is the path of the 99%, characterized by the chase for the next big thing, an obsession with novelty over durability. The antithesis of the inevitable brand is the trendy tech company. Consider the graveyard of companies that were once hailed as market disruptors. In the late 1990s, during the dot-com bubble, companies like Pets.com were household names. They had clever advertising, massive venture capital funding, and a story that captivated the public imagination, revolutionizing the pet supply industry. Investors poured billions into these companies, convinced they were getting in on the ground floor of a new economy. The problem was, the brand was a hollow shell. It had recognition, but it had no deep-seated trust, no history, no pricing power. It was a brand built on advertising dollars, not on a century of customer satisfaction. When the market turned and capital dried up, the company collapsed, wiping out virtually all shareholder value. The 99% had bought a story. Buffett, with his focus on Coca-Cola, had bought a history. Another common mistake is confusing a hot product with a durable brand. Think of companies like GoPro. For a few years, their action cameras were a cultural phenomenon. The product was innovative and exciting, and the stock soared. But the brand itself was tied entirely to that single product category. It didn't represent a deeper promise to the customer. When competitors, both from established players like Sony and from cheaper generic manufacturers, entered the market, GoPro had no real defense. Its customers were loyal to the cool product, not to the GoPro brand itself. They had no significant pricing power, and their market share eroded rapidly. Investors who bought at the peak, captivated by the trend, suffered devastating losses. They mistook a temporary product advantage for a permanent brand moat. A true inevitable, like Apple, isn't just about the iPhone. The Apple brand represents a promise of design, simplicity, and an integrated ecosystem. That's why they can sell phones, watches, computers, and services at premium prices, and why their customers exhibit a level of loyalty that is the envy of the world. The 99% chase the GoPro. The smart money invests in the Apple. This behavior is driven by a deep-seated desire for shortcuts. The hard work of analyzing a company's decades-long history of pricing power is tedious. The thought experiment of the Global Teenager Test requires patience and qualitative judgment. It's far more exciting to read a headline about a company with a new patent for a revolutionary battery or a paradigm-shifting software platform. This appeal to novelty leads investors down a dangerous path, where they value complex, speculative stories over simple, proven realities. They ignore the boring blue-chip stocks that have been compounding wealth for generations in favor of a lottery ticket with a more exciting narrative. The disastrous consequence is a portfolio built on a series of these lottery tickets, most of which end up being worthless. It's a strategy that generates a lot of activity, a lot of trading fees, and a lot of anxiety, but very little in the way of actual long-term wealth building. It is the rejection of the buy and hold philosophy in favor of a buy and hope philosophy. The path of the 99% is littered with the ghosts of once popular brands that couldn't withstand the test of time, a testament to the fact that in the world of investing, what is new is often dangerous, and what is old, proven, and trusted is often the surest path to riches. The connection between a dominant brand and a company's financial statements is direct, powerful, and the ultimate source of its long-term value. This is where the abstract concept of share of mind translates into cold, hard cash, driving portfolio growth and creating the financial freedom every investor seeks. The first and most obvious manifestation is on the income statement, specifically in the form of gross margin. Gross margin is the percentage of revenue left after subtracting the cost of goods sold. A company with a weak brand must compete primarily on price. To win a customer, they have to offer the lowest cost, which means their margins are perpetually squeezed. Coca-Cola, on the other hand, doesn't have to be the cheapest cola on the shelf. In fact, it's often one of the most expensive. People willingly pay that premium. This ability to charge more for a product that costs roughly the same to produce as its generic competitors results in massive, sustainable gross margins. This excess profit isn't a one-time event. It's a structural advantage that repeats with every single can sold, billions of times a day. This river of high-margin cash is what funds dividends, share buybacks, and future growth, all of which directly enrich the long-term shareholder. The second financial connection is less obvious, but equally important: a lower cost of customer acquisition. Look at a company's selling, general, and administrative (SG&A) expenses. A huge portion of this line item is for marketing and advertising. A new company or a company with a weak brand has to shout to be heard. They must spend enormous sums of money just to make consumers aware they exist. An inevitable brand like Nike or Apple can spend its marketing budget far more efficiently. Their advertising isn't about introducing the brand, it's about reinforcing an existing emotional connection. The swoosh or the Apple logo is already a global icon. This efficiency means more of each revenue dollar drops down to the bottom line as net income. It's an enormous competitive advantage. While their rivals are burning cash just to get noticed, the inevitable is reinvesting its profits into research and development, or returning it to shareholders. Finally, and perhaps most powerfully, a dominant brand creates what Buffett calls the float, in its various forms, most visibly as high return on tangible capital employed, ROTCE. A business with a powerful brand needs less tangible capital, factories, machinery, inventory, to generate its profits than a lesser competitor. Coca-Cola's most valuable asset, its brand, isn't a physical thing. Because of its brand, its bottlers and distributors are willing to invest their own capital in the trucks and plants needed to get the product to market. This capital-light model means that the profits Coca-Cola generates are enormous relative to the tangible assets it has to own. An investor should look for companies that consistently produce high returns on the net tangible assets they employ. This is a clear financial signal that the company possesses a powerful intangible asset, like a brand, that is generating profits. This financial alchemy, turning a non-physical asset into torrents of free cash flow, is the ultimate engine of compound interest. It allows the company to grow and generate wealth for its owners without requiring massive, continuous capital infusions, creating a self-perpetuating cycle of value creation that is the very definition of a high-quality stock and the bedrock of any sound investment strategy for retirement planning. The human mind craves consistency. We are creatures of habit, finding comfort and efficiency in predictable routines. This fundamental aspect of our nature is the second pillar upon which Buffett builds his thesis of the inevitables. He looks for businesses that cater not to a fleeting desire or a technological trend, but to a deep-seated, unchanging human habit. The more ingrained the habit, the more predictable the revenue, and the more inevitable the company's long-term success. Perhaps no story from his career illustrates this principle more powerfully than his investment in American Express, during the infamous salad oil scandal of 1963. It was a moment of absolute crisis for the company, a trial by fire that threatened to burn it to the ground. And it was in the ashes of this panic that Buffett found one of the greatest investment opportunities of his life. The scandal was a bizarre tale of fraud on a massive scale. A company in New Jersey, Allied Crude Vegetable Oil, run by a man named Tino DeAngelis, had been borrowing huge sums of money from various banks, including American Express's warehousing subsidiary. The loans were secured by what was supposed to be a vast inventory of salad oil, held in giant storage tanks. The receipts for this oil, guaranteed by American Express, were treated as gold standard collateral on Wall Street. The problem was, the oil wasn't there. DeAngelis had devised an ingenious system of filling the tanks mostly with water, with only a top layer of oil. When inspectors would dip their measuring sticks in, they'd hit oil. The fraud was colossal, amounting to over $175 million in fake collateral, a staggering sum in 1963. When the fraud was discovered, Allied Crude collapsed, and Wall Street turned its fury on American Express. The belief was that Amex, having guaranteed the receipts, would be on the hook for the entire loss, a sum so large it could bankrupt the company. Panic ensued. The stock, which had been trading at over $60 a share, plummeted to $35. The smart money, the professional investors, the talking heads, they were all selling, convinced the company was doomed. Buffett, then a young, relatively unknown money manager in Omaha, saw the panic as an opportunity. He didn't just look at the headlines. He did what he always did. He went to work. He knew the potential liability from the salad oil fraud was a big, scary, but ultimately quantifiable number. The real question was about the value of the underlying business. What was the true source of American Express's earnings power? It wasn't in warehousing salad oil. It was in two habit-forming products, their traveler's checks and their iconic charge card. So Buffett became a private investigator. He went to banks and travel agencies and observed people buying traveler's checks. He saw that customers didn't ask for a specific brand. They asked for American Express checks. The brand was synonymous with the product. More importantly, he visited restaurants and hotels. He talked to merchants. He would stand at the checkout counter and observe customer behavior. He saw people pulling out their little green American Express card to pay for dinner. He asked the restaurateurs if the scandal had caused their customers to stop using the card. The answer was a universal no. He asked them if competitors like Diners Club were gaining market share. Again, the answer was no. What Buffett realized was that the American Express card was not just a piece of plastic for conducting transactions. It was a badge of affluence, a status symbol. The habit of using it was deeply ingrained in the behavior of its affluent cardholders. The scandal, as terrifying as it was for Wall Street, was an abstract financial headline that had zero impact on the core human habit the company served: the desire for convenience and the signaling of social status. The fraud was a one-time, albeit massive, financial hit. The habit of the customers was a perpetual, recurring stream of revenue. Buffett concluded that the fundamental earning power of the business was completely intact. He calculated that the business was worth at least $60 per share, even after accounting for the worst-case scenario losses from the scandal. With the stock trading at $35, he had found an enormous margin of safety. He invested aggressively, making it the single largest holding in his partnership, committing 40% of his assets. The market was panicking about a temporary crisis. Buffett was coolly investing in a permanent human habit. In the years that followed, the market realized its mistake. American Express survived the scandal, the stock recovered, and then soared, generating a monumental return for Buffett's partners, and proving that the most powerful moat of all is a business woven into the very fabric of how people live their lives. The psychological foundation of a habit-forming business is one of the most powerful forces in both commerce and investing. At its core, it leverages the brain's innate desire for efficiency. Our brains consume about 20% of our body's energy, despite being only 2% of our weight. To conserve this precious resource, the brain is constantly trying to turn conscious decisions into unconscious routines. This process is governed by a neurological loop identified by scientists, known as the habit loop, which consists of three parts: a cue, a routine, and a reward. An inevitable business is one that has successfully embedded its product or service into this loop for millions of people. For American Express, the cue might be the arrival of the check at the end of a business dinner. The routine is the simple, practiced act of pulling out the green card. The reward is multifaceted. It's the convenience of a cashless transaction, the subtle feeling of status and success, and the accrual of membership reward points. Once this loop is established, the action becomes automatic. The cardholder no longer consciously weighs the pros and cons of different payment methods. They simply execute the ingrained routine. Breaking this habit requires a significant cognitive effort, something our brains are wired to avoid. This taps into the powerful principle of status quo bias. We have a natural and often irrational preference for the current state of affairs. Any change from our baseline is perceived as a loss. For a customer of a habit-forming business, switching to a competitor represents a deviation from this status quo. They would have to fill out new paperwork, learn a new system, and risk an unknown outcome. The perceived hassle and potential for a negative experience often outweigh the potential benefits of switching, even if a competitor offers a slightly better price or feature. This creates incredible customer stickiness, or in business terms, low churn. Think about your bank. The odds are high that you have been with the same bank for years, perhaps even decades. Is it because they offer the absolute best interest rates and the lowest fees? Probably not. It's because the thought of moving all your direct deposits, automatic bill payments, and linked accounts is a monumental headache. The bank has created a powerful status quo bias through ingrained habits. An investment in a company that benefits from this bias is a bet on human inertia, and human inertia is one of the most reliable forces on the planet. Furthermore, these businesses often capitalize on the psychology of identity. The product ceases to be something the customer connaît and becomes part of who the customer connaît. For decades, being an American Express card member was a statement about one's financial standing and lifestyle. For a coffee drinker, saying "I'm a Starbucks person" is a declaration of personal taste and tribe. When a brand becomes intertwined with a customer's self-concept, the loyalty becomes intensely emotional. An attack on the brand can feel like a personal attack. This creates a legion of unpaid, passionate brand ambassadors. Buffett saw this in 1963. The users of the American Express card weren't just customers. They were members of a club. The salad oil scandal was an issue for the accountants in the back office. It didn't change the feeling they got when they put that card down on the table. This deep, psychological entrenchment, combining the automated efficiency of the habit loop, the powerful inertia of the status quo bias, and the emotional connection of identity, is what makes a business's cash flows so resilient and predictable, transforming a simple company into a true wealth-building machine. To apply this pillar to your own investment strategy, you need a practical mental model for identifying businesses built on these unshakable habits. We can call this the morning routine audit. It's a simple, powerful framework for seeing the world through the lens of ingrained consumer behavior. Step 1. Take out a piece of paper and meticulously list every single action you take from the moment you wake up until you arrive at work or start your day's main activity. Be granular. Waking up, brushing your teeth, taking a shower, making coffee, checking your phone, eating breakfast, commuting. Step 2. For each action, identify the branded products or services you used. What brand of toothpaste did you use? Colgate. What soap? Dove. What coffee did you brew? Folgers. Or buy? Starbucks. What social media app did you check first? Instagram. What news source did you read? The New York Times. What car did you drive? Ford. Or what rideshare service did you use? Uber. Step 3 is the analysis. Look at your list and ask yourself for each branded interaction, how much conscious thought went into that choice? The odds are, for many of them, the answer is 0. You didn't perform a cost-benefit analysis on which toothpaste to use this morning. You just reached for the one you've been using for years. These are your habits. Now expand this thought experiment. Which of these brands would you be most resistant to changing? If your local store stopped carrying your brand of coffee, would it be a minor inconvenience or a major disruption to your day? The products that fall into the major disruption category are likely powered by deep-seated habits. Finally, step 4 is to research the publicly traded companies behind these brands. Investigate their financial history. Do you see decades of steady, predictable revenue growth? Do you see high customer retention rates and low churn? This morning routine audit, when applied with discipline, can reveal powerful investment opportunities hidden in plain sight. It shifts your focus from exciting but speculative growth stories to the boring, reliable, and immensely profitable businesses that form the invisible scaffolding of our daily lives. This blueprint goes beyond just consumer staples. Apply it to business habits. What software is indispensable for a modern office, Microsoft Office? What accounting software do small businesses rely on? Intuit QuickBooks. What payroll processor is the default choice for millions of companies? ADP. The switching costs for these business-to-business habits are enormous. Retraining an entire workforce on a new software suite or migrating decades of financial data is a corporate nightmare. Therefore, these companies enjoy a level of customer captivity that is the envy of the business world. By training yourself to see the world not as a collection of products, but as a series of ingrained loops and routines, you can begin to identify the companies whose success is not dependent on the next product launch, but on the simple, powerful, and enduring force of human habit. This is the key to building a portfolio of high-quality stocks that provide a steady path towards financial freedom, not through speculation, but through a deep understanding of what makes people tick. The antithesis to investing in unchanging human habits is the siren song of, quote, disruptive technology, a path walked by the 99% of investors who are perpetually chasing the future at the expense of the present. This approach is built on the alluring narrative that a single brilliant invention can upend an entire industry overnight, creating astronomical wealth for early believers. While true disruption does happen, for every one Amazon, there are 1,000 failures like Webvan, a company that in the late 1990s promised to revolutionize the grocery industry by delivering food to people's homes. It had a compelling story, raised nearly $1 billion, and built a massive infrastructure of warehouses and delivery trucks. Investors, mesmerized by the disruption narrative, poured money in. The problem was, they overestimated the public's desire to change a deeply ingrained habit, the weekly trip to the grocery store, and massively underestimated the logistical complexity and cost of their operation. The company burned through its cash at a legendary rate and collapsed into bankruptcy, a classic example of a brilliant idea that was too far ahead of consumer habit. The 99% invested in the disruptive story. The disciplined investor would have noted the unbreachable habit of grocery shopping and stayed away. Another fatal flaw on this path is the underestimation of second-order effects. Consider the excitement around 3D printing stocks a number of years ago. The story was irresistible, a printer in every home, capable of creating anything from toys to machine parts. It was hailed as the next industrial revolution. Stocks in companies like 3D Systems and Stratasys soared to incredible heights. The 99% piled in, dreaming of a future they saw in science fiction movies. They failed to ask the critical second-order questions. How large is the actual addressable market for home 3D printing? Is the technology simple enough for the average consumer to use effectively? What are the material costs and limitations? Most importantly, does this technology solve a problem that the average person actually has? The reality was that for most people, 3D printing was a novelty, not a necessity. The habit it was trying to replace, buying finished goods from a store, was far too convenient and efficient. The hype bubble eventually burst, and the stocks crashed, inflicting catastrophic losses on those who had bought into the narrative without analyzing the underlying human behavior. They fell in love with the technology, not the business. This path is paved with a cognitive bias known as recency bias, the tendency to overemphasize recent events and extrapolate them indefinitely into the future. When a new technology emerges and a few early adopters have great success, investors pile in, assuming that trend will continue in a straight line upwards. They see the initial explosive growth and believe it will last forever, forgetting that all technologies follow an S-curve of adoption, with an eventual plateau. They ignore the brutal realities of competition that inevitably arise once a market is proven. The 99% are drawn to the thrill of the vertical ascent, the hockey stick chart. They buy at the peak of inflated expectations, only to be left holding the bag when the inevitable disillusionment sets in. Investing in a company like Wrigley's Gum, a classic Buffett-style investment, is the polar opposite. The growth is slow, boring, and predictable. But it is powered by a simple habit that has persisted for generations. There is no hype, no recency bias, only the relentless, quiet compounding of a business tied to an unchanging human desire. The path of the 99% is a roller coaster of exhilarating highs and gut-wrenching lows. The path of the inevitable is a slow, steady, inexorable climb to the summit of financial security. The financial power of a habit-forming business is most clearly visible in the predictability and quality of its revenue. This is what separates a truly great investment from a speculative gamble and forms the foundation of any sound retirement planning strategy. On the financial statements, the first place this appears is in the line item revenue. For a company selling a trendy gadget, revenue can be incredibly volatile. It might spike after a new product launch, and then collapse as the fad fades or competitors move in. For a company like Procter & Gamble, which sells habit-forming products like Tide laundry detergent and Crest toothpaste, revenue is remarkably smooth and predictable. You can look back for decades and see a line that steadily trends upwards, with only minor fluctuations during recessions. This predictability is worth an enormous premium to a long-term investor. It means the company can plan for the future with confidence, investing in research and development and new facilities, knowing that the demand for its products is not in question. This stability translates directly into a more stable stock price and a reliable stream of dividend stocks, which are the lifeblood of a buy-and-hold portfolio. The second, more subtle financial connection lies in deferred or unearned revenue on the balance sheet. This is a liability account that represents cash received from customers for goods or services that have not yet been delivered. Think of a subscription-based business like Costco or Amazon Prime. When you pay your annual membership fee, the company receives the cash up front, but only earns it month by month over the course of the year. This is a beautiful business model. The company gets to use your money, interest-free, before it has even provided the full service. This customer-funded financing, often called float, is a powerful engine for growth. Habitual, subscription-based models create enormous amounts of this float, which the company can use to fund its operations and expansion. This is a clear financial signal of a sticky customer base locked into a recurring habit. Finally, the most potent financial indicator of a habit-forming business is its free cash flow conversion rate. Free cash flow is the cash a company generates after accounting for the capital expenditures needed to maintain or expand its asset base. It's the real profit that can be returned to shareholders. The conversion rate measures how much of its reported net income, its accounting profit, is actually converted into hard cash. Many companies, especially in heavy industries, may report high net income but have to spend all of it, and then some, just to maintain their competitive position. They are on a capital expenditure treadmill. A business built on habits and brands often has a very high free cash flow conversion rate. Because its primary asset is intangible, the brand and the customer habit, it doesn't need to constantly reinvest in massive new factories. This means a huge portion of its earnings becomes real, spendable cash. This cash is the ultimate measure of a company's financial health. It can be used to pay dividends, buy back stock, which increases each remaining shareholder's ownership stake, or make strategic acquisitions. A business that consistently converts its earnings into a torrent of free cash flow is a compounding machine, the perfect cornerstone for any portfolio aimed at achieving long-term financial freedom. If the first pillar of an inevitable is the brand that lives in the customer's mind, and the second is the habit that lives in their daily routine, the third is the physical or structural advantage that is almost impossible for a competitor to replicate. Warren Buffett thinks of these as economic toll booths. Imagine owning the only bridge across a river into a thriving city. Every person, every truck, every piece of commerce that wants to enter that city must cross your bridge and pay your toll. You don't have to be the cleverest bridge operator. You don't need fancy marketing. You just need to own the bridge. In the modern economy, these bridges take many forms, but none is more powerful or more representative of this principle than the American railroads. And no investment better illustrates Buffett's commitment to this idea than his 2009 acquisition of the Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railroad, or BNSF. It was a massive all-in bet on the future of America, made in the darkest days of the great financial crisis. The year was 2009. The global financial system was on the brink of collapse. Confidence had evaporated. The prevailing wisdom was that the American economy was entering a long, dark winter. Companies were laying off workers by the hundreds of thousands, and the stock market was near its lowest point in over a decade. It was a time of extreme fear and uncertainty. And it was in this environment that Warren Buffett announced that Berkshire Hathaway would be acquiring the entirety of BNSF, a company it didn't already own, for a staggering $44 billion. It was, at the time, the largest acquisition in Berkshire's history. To the panicked market, it seemed like an act of madness. Railroads were the ultimate old economy business. They were capital-intensive, heavily unionized, and tied to the grimy business of moving coal, grain, and chemicals. They were the opposite of the sleek, capital-light tech companies that were supposedly the future. But Buffett saw something else entirely. He saw an irreplaceable asset, a vital economic artery, a toll booth on the American economy. His logic was simple and profound. He looked at a map of the United States and saw the 500 miles of track owned by BNSF. He asked himself a simple question: could anyone build a competing network? The answer was an unequivocal no. The cost of acquiring the land, securing the permits, and laying that much track would be not just billions, but trillions of dollars. It would be a logistical and political impossibility. BNSF, along with its main competitor Union Pacific, formed a duopoly on land-based freight movement in the western United States. If you were a farmer in North Dakota who needed to ship your wheat to a port on the Pacific coast, or a coal mine in Wyoming that needed to supply a power plant in Texas, you had essentially one choice. You had to use the railroad. Trucks could compete on shorter routes, but for moving heavy bulk commodities over long distances, rail was, and is, vastly more fuel-efficient and cost-effective. Buffett wasn't buying a company that had to fight for customers every day. He was buying a piece of essential national infrastructure. He called it an all-in wager on the economic future of the United States. He reasoned that as long as the country's population grew and its economy expanded, more goods would need to be moved. More grain would be harvested, more consumer products would be imported through ports, more materials would be needed for construction, and a huge portion of that stuff would have to travel on BNSF's tracks. The railroad's success was not tied to a single product or technology. It was tied to the overall prosperity of the nation. It was a direct proxy for American GDP growth. He was buying a toll booth on progress itself. The purchase, made when others were paralyzed by fear, has been a spectacular success. BNSF has become one of the core pillars of Berkshire Hathaway's earnings, generating billions in cash year after year. It is the ultimate buy-and-hold asset, a business whose competitive advantage is literally written in steel across the face of the continent, a perfect example of a high-quality stock that forms the bedrock of a retirement planning strategy built to last for generations. The psychological principle underpinning the power of a toll booth business is the immense pain associated with switching costs. This is a concept that goes beyond mere financial expense. It encompasses the time, effort, risk, and psychological stress of changing from one supplier to another. Our brains are inherently lazy and risk-averse. When we find a solution that works, we are incredibly reluctant to change, even if a slightly better alternative comes along. A great toll booth business creates astronomically high switching costs for its customers, effectively locking them in. In the case of BNSF, the switching costs for its major customers are, for all practical purposes, infinite. A coal mine or a massive grain elevator is a fixed asset. Its location was chosen precisely because it had access to BNSF's rail line. For that mine to switch to another railroad, it would have to physically move its entire operation. At a cost of billions, it's simply not possible. This creates a customer relationship that is less of a choice and more of a permanent, symbiotic partnership. This principle extends far beyond physical infrastructure. Consider the software that runs a large corporation's core operations, known as Enterprise Resource Planning or ERP software, dominated by companies like SAP and Oracle. Once a global company has integrated this software into every facet of its business, from accounting and human resources to supply chain management and manufacturing, the cost of switching is cataclysmic. It's not just the tens of millions of dollars in licensing fees for new software. It's the years of implementation, the retraining of thousands of employees, the risk of data loss, and the potential for catastrophic business disruption during the transition. The process is so painful and risky that it's often referred to as corporate open-heart surgery. As a result, customers will endure price increases, clunky interfaces, and mediocre customer service simply because the alternative is too terrifying to contemplate. This is a digital toll booth, and it's just as powerful as a steel rail line. This dynamic leverages the endowment effect, a cognitive bias where we place a higher value on things we own or are familiar with. Employees who have spent years learning and mastering a particular software system feel a sense of ownership over that skill. A proposal to switch systems is not just an operational change, it's a threat to their expertise and their professional comfort zone. This creates an enormous internal resistance to change within the customer's organization, further cementing the incumbent's position. Buffett's investment in railroads and our example of enterprise software reveal a profound truth. The most durable businesses are not necessarily the ones that delight their customers the most, but the ones that make it the most painful to leave. By identifying businesses that have ingeniously woven themselves into the very infrastructure of their customers' lives or operations, you find companies with a level of pricing power and revenue predictability that is almost unmatched. They have transformed a customer relationship into a structural dependency, which is the financial equivalent of owning a license to print money. How can an individual investor, without an army of analysts, identify these economic toll booths? The blueprint is a mental model called the infrastructure stack audit. It involves looking at any given industry not as a collection of competing companies, but as a stack of interconnected layers, and then identifying the company that owns the foundational non-negotiable layer. Step 1. Choose a major sector of the economy you want to understand, for example, e-commerce. Step 2. Deconstruct that industry into its essential components, its stack. At the top layer you have the retailers themselves, the thousands of websites selling goods, a highly competitive space. Below that, you have the payment processors that enable the transactions, like Visa and MasterCard. Below that, you have the logistics and shipping companies that move the packages, like UPS and FedEx. And at the very bottom, you have the data centers and cloud computing platforms that power the entire digital infrastructure, like Amazon Web Services. Step 3 is to analyze the competitive dynamics at each layer of the stack. The top layer, retail, is a brutal, low-margin war. The bottom layer, however, is a different story. The cloud computing space is dominated by just a few massive players who have built an infrastructure that would cost tens of billions of dollars to replicate. They own the digital rails upon which modern e-commerce runs. They have created a toll booth. Any new e-commerce startup is almost certainly going to be a customer of AWS, Microsoft Azure, or Google Cloud. The switching costs, while not infinite, are substantial once a company has built its entire application on one of these platforms. Let's apply this to another industry, personal technology. The top of the stack is the app developer space, with millions of apps competing for your attention. A brutally competitive layer. Below that, you have the device manufacturers. But at the foundational layer, you have the operating systems, the duopoly of Apple's iOS and Google's Android. They own the app stores, the indispensable toll booths through which all software must pass to reach the consumer. They get to take a cut of billions of transactions, creating a revenue stream of staggering quality and durability. This infrastructure stack audit is a powerful mental model for any investor dedicated to a long-term investment strategy. It trains you to ignore the noise and competition at the surface and look for the company that owns the underlying indispensable plumbing. These are the companies with the highest barriers to entry, the greatest pricing power, and the most predictable long-term growth. Finding and owning a piece of one of these foundational layers is one of the surest ways to build lasting wealth and achieve financial freedom. The path of the 99% is a landscape littered with investments in highly competitive, low-margin industries. It is the antithesis of the toll booth strategy and a recipe for financial disappointment. The most common mistake is becoming infatuated with a company's product or service without any regard for the structure of the industry in which it operates. A perfect example is the airline industry. For many people, flying is a modern marvel. The logos are iconic, the business is globally important, and it feels exciting. Investors are perennially drawn to it. Yet, as Buffett himself has famously said, if a capitalist had been present at Kitty Hawk back in the early 1900s, he should have shot Orville right. He would have saved his descendants a lot of money. Why? Because the airline industry is a structural nightmare for capital. The barriers to entry are deceptively low. You just need to lease a few planes. The product is a commodity. For most travelers, a seat is a seat, and they will choose based on price. The costs are high and largely fixed: planes, fuel, labor. While revenues are volatile and subject to vicious price wars. There is no durable competitive advantage, no toll booth. Each airline must fight for every single customer on every single flight, every single day. This constant, brutal competition has destroyed far more capital than it has created over the past century. The 99% buy into the romance of the airline brand. The disciplined investor analyzes the industry structure and runs in the opposite direction. Another trap is the allure of the growth industry. Without considering the barriers to entry, the solar panel manufacturing industry is a prime example. The story is incredibly compelling. Clean energy, a solution to climate change, and a massive, growing global market. Many investors piled into solar manufacturers, believing they were investing in the future. But they failed to see that the manufacturing process itself was quickly becoming commoditized. There was no proprietary technology that couldn't be copied. New competitors, particularly from overseas, could enter the market easily, leading to a massive glut of supply and collapsing prices. While the solar energy industry as a whole has grown, most of the manufacturing companies have been terrible investments, many going bankrupt. They were operating in a hyper-competitive field with no moat. The 99% bought the growth story. The toll booth investor would have looked for a different part of the value chain, perhaps a utility company with a regulated monopoly on electricity transmission, the wires that are the true toll booth of the energy sector. This flawed approach is rooted in a narrative-driven view of the world. People prefer a good story over a boring analysis of industry structure. The story of a plucky startup airline challenging the legacy carriers is more exciting than the story of a railroad that has been shipping coal for 150 years. The narrative of a solar company saving the planet is more emotionally satisfying than the financial statements of a company that owns a regulated gas pipeline. This preference for narrative over structure leads investors to consistently put their capital into tough businesses. A tough business is one where even a brilliant CEO has to work miracles just to earn a decent return on capital. A great business, a toll booth business, is one where even a mediocre manager can do well because the underlying economics of the industry are so favorable. The 99% bet on the jockey. The wise investor bets on the horse, ensuring it's running in a race with only one other competitor. The result of this mistake is a portfolio that constantly struggles, that requires heroic efforts to produce mediocre returns, and that is perpetually vulnerable to the harsh winds of competition. The direct financial connection between owning a toll booth and building wealth is found in two of the most important concepts in all of finance: barriers to entry and return on invested capital, ROIC. This is where the strategic advantage of an economic moat translates into quantifiable financial performance that drives long-term portfolio growth. Barriers to entry are the obstacles that prevent new competitors from entering a market. For BNSF, the barrier is the astronomical cost and political impossibility of building a competing rail network. This reality is reflected directly in its financial statements through sustained, high profit margins. Because its customers have limited alternatives, BNSF can price its services to ensure it earns an attractive return. You won't see vicious price wars in the railroad duopoly like you do in the airline industry. This pricing discipline flows directly to the bottom line, resulting in a level of profitability that is structurally impossible for companies in more competitive fields to achieve. An investor can spot this by comparing the operating margins of a company to its peers over a long period. A company that consistently maintains margins significantly higher than its industry average likely possesses a powerful moat. This leads to the ultimate measure of a great business: a high and sustainable return on invested capital. ROIC measures how efficiently a company is using its capital, both debt and equity, to generate profits. Imagine two companies that each earn a profit of $100 million. Company A had to invest $1 billion in factories and equipment to earn that profit, a 10% ROIC. Company B, a toll booth business, only had to invest $500 million to earn the same amount, a 20% ROIC. Company B is twice as capital efficient. It is a far superior business. Toll booth businesses like railroads, pipeline operators, or dominant software companies tend to have very high and durable ROICs. Their moats protect them from the kind of competition that erodes returns. A company that can consistently generate a high ROIC can essentially self-fund its own growth. The profits it generates are so substantial relative to the capital it needs that it can reinvest those profits back into the business at a high rate of return, creating a virtuous cycle of compounding. This is the financial engine of wealth building. When you buy a stock, you are buying a piece of this engine. A portfolio filled with high ROIC businesses is a portfolio designed for effortless, long-term compounding, the surest path to achieving a comfortable retirement and lasting financial freedom. The numbers on the page, the stable margins, the high returns on capital, are the direct financial echo of the steel rails, the proprietary software, and the irreplaceable infrastructure that define an economic toll booth. There is a profound humility at the core of Warren Buffett's investment philosophy, a principle that is perhaps the most difficult for ambitious, intelligent people to accept. It is the simple acknowledgement of the limits of one's own knowledge. Buffett has built one of the world's greatest fortunes not just by making brilliant decisions, but by assiduously avoiding difficult ones. He has a mental framework he calls the circle of competence. Inside the circle are the businesses and industries he understands intimately. Outside the circle is everything else. His rule is brutally simple: he never, ever ventures outside that circle. This disciplined adherence to simplicity, this genius of knowing what you don't know, is the fourth pillar of the inevitables. The most famous demonstration of this principle was not an investment he made, but the thousands of investments he pointedly refused to make during the heights of the dot-com bubble in the late 1990s. The period from 1997 to early 2000 was a time of market euphoria unlike any seen before. The rise of the internet had convinced millions that a new economy had been born, one where the old rules of valuation and profitability no longer applied. Technology stocks, many of which had no earnings and sometimes no revenue, were soaring to astronomical valuations. Companies were valued not on their cash flow but on their eyeballs or their mindshare. It was an era of unbridled optimism, and anyone who questioned the frenzy was labeled a dinosaur, a relic of a bygone era. And the chief dinosaur, in the eyes of the media and Wall Street, was Warren Buffett. While tech stocks doubled, tripled, and quadrupled in value, Berkshire Hathaway's stock actually lagged the market. Shareholders were getting restless. Pundits wrote scathing articles, declaring that Buffett had lost his touch. He was famously on the cover of Barron's in 1999 with the headline, "What's Wrong, Warren?" The pressure to abandon his time-tested principles and join the tech party was immense. Buffett's response was unwavering. He and his partner, Charlie Munger, watched as the madness unfolded, but they refused to participate. It wasn't because they were ideologically opposed to technology. It was because they couldn't, with any certainty, predict what the landscape of the technology industry would look like in 10 or 20 years. He would openly admit it in interviews and at his annual meetings. He'd say, "I know what people will be chewing in 10 years, so I like Wrigley's gum. I have no idea what technology will be dominant in 10 years. He couldn't answer the crucial questions. Who would be the winner? What would their profit margins be? What would be the durable competitive advantage? The entire industry, in his view, was outside his circle of competence. So he put it in what he calls the too hard pile, while others were frantically trying to pick the winners among hundreds of competing .coms. Buffett was quietly continuing to invest in businesses he understood completely: insurance, furniture stores, consumer brands. The ridicule reached a crescendo. He was a relic, a man who didn't get it. Then in March of 2000, the bubble burst. The Nasdaq index, which had peaked at over 5,000, began a catastrophic collapse. The high-flying tech darlings that were supposed to change the world went bankrupt one after another. Pets.com, Webvan, eToys, they all vanished, taking trillions of dollars of investor capital with them. The new economy was revealed to be a classic speculative bubble, and through it all, Berkshire Hathaway, with its portfolio of boring, understandable businesses, stood like a rock. Its value was preserved. The discipline of staying within his circle of competence had not only saved his shareholders from devastating losses, but had also positioned him with a mountain of cash to take advantage of the bargains that emerged in the aftermath of the crash. The story of Buffett's refusal to dance at the .com party is the ultimate lesson in intellectual humility. It demonstrates that in investing, your biggest advantage is not a high IQ, but the emotional and intellectual discipline to stay away from games you don't understand. True genius is not in knowing all the answers, but in knowing which questions you can't answer. The psychological force that Buffett masterfully circumvents with his circle of competence rule is the pernicious overconfidence bias. This is the tendency for people to have excessive faith in their own knowledge and abilities. It's particularly dangerous in intelligent, successful individuals who are accustomed to being right in their own fields and mistakenly assume that their expertise is transferable to the complex domain of investing. The .com bubble was a perfect petri dish for this bias. Doctors, lawyers, and engineers who had achieved great success in their professions suddenly believed they could pick the winning microprocessor company or the dominant e-commerce platform. Their intelligence in one area created a dangerous illusion of competence in another. They confused their ability to use the internet with an ability to analyze the business models of internet companies. Buffett, despite being one of the most intelligent investors in history, actively fights this bias by constantly emphasizing the boundaries of his knowledge. He is, in essence, practicing a form of structured humility. This is closely related to the Dunning-Kruger effect, a cognitive bias in which people with low ability at a task overestimate their ability. In investing, a little bit of knowledge can be a very dangerous thing. An amateur investor who reads a few articles about artificial intelligence or gene editing can feel a sense of mastery over the subject. They learn the buzzwords and the exciting narratives, And this surface-level familiarity is mistaken for deep understanding. They fail to recognize the vastness of what they don't know, the competitive landscape, the regulatory hurdles, the technological risks, the complexities of commercialization. This leads them to make highly concentrated bets in complex fields, armed with a false sense of security. Buffett's approach is the antidote. He assumes his default state is one of ignorance. He will only invest in a business if he can explain, in simple terms, exactly how it makes money and why it will continue to do so for decades. If the explanation requires complex jargon or relies on speculative future technology, it's an automatic no. Finally, this pillar is a defense against the fear of missing out, or FOMO, a powerful social and emotional driver. During the dot-com bubble, the stories were everywhere of ordinary people getting rich overnight. Your neighbor, your dentist, your coworker, everyone seemed to be making easy money in tech stocks. The psychological pressure to join in was immense. To sit on the sidelines felt like actively choosing to be a loser. FOMO is not a rational calculation. It's a primal fear of being left behind by the tribe. It short-circuits the analytical part of our brain and triggers our impulsive, emotional centers. Buffett's too-hard pile is his systemic defense against FOMO. By predefining the areas in which he will not play, he removes the emotional turmoil of the decision. When a hot tech stock is soaring, he doesn't have to agonize over whether to buy it. It's already been classified as outside the circle, so the question is moot. This discipline allows him to remain rational when everyone else is caught up in a collective mania. It is the psychological armor that protects capital from the most destructive force in the market, crowd-driven emotion. Translating Buffett's intellectual humility into a practical blueprint for your own investment decisions is crucial for long-term success. The core mental model is the fifth-grader explanation test. It is a simple but brutally effective filter for avoiding investments you don't truly understand. Step 1. Before you invest a single dollar in any company, you must be able to sit down and write out a simple explanation of what the business does, how it makes money, and why it has a durable competitive advantage. Step 2. This explanation must be so simple and clear that a reasonably intelligent fifth grader could read it and understand it completely. If your explanation requires phrases like proprietary algorithm, synergistic leverage, blockchain integration, or any other form of complex jargon, you have failed the test. It is a sign that you are likely hiding a lack of true understanding behind impressive-sounding words. To execute this, follow this granular process. First, write down, in a single sentence, what product or service the company sells. For Coca-Cola, it's, they sell branded beverage concentrates to bottlers around the world. For BNSF, it's, they move large quantities of physical goods across the country on trains. For a complex biotech company, this sentence is often impossible to write without resorting to impenetrable technical language. That's your first red flag. Second, describe in 2 or 3 sentences who the customers are and why they choose this company's product over a competitor's. For See's Candies, it's, customers are people buying gifts for holidays and special occasions. They choose See's because of its reputation for quality and the nostalgic connection to the brand. If you can't clearly articulate the customer's motivation, you don't understand the business. Third, and most critically, explain in a short paragraph why this company will still be a dominant force in its industry 10 to 20 years from now. This is the moat test. If your explanation relies on a specific patent that might expire or a technological advantage that could be copied, it's not a durable moat. A good answer will focus on timeless concepts like brand, network effects, or high switching costs. If you can successfully complete this 3-part explanation in simple, clear language, you have likely found a business that resides within your circle of competence. This process forces you to substitute genuine understanding for vague, exciting narratives. It is the ultimate defense against the Dunning-Kruger effect and the siren song of complexity. It ensures that your portfolio is not built on hope or hype, but on a foundation of businesses whose economics you grasp to your very core. This simple discipline of refusing to invest in anything you cannot easily explain is one of the most powerful risk management tools available, and a cornerstone of building a truly resilient, buy-and-hold portfolio designed for lasting financial freedom. The path of the 99% is paved with a dangerous attraction to complexity and the illusion of sophistication. The antithesis of the circle of competence is the Mad Libs approach to investing, where people string together exciting-sounding buzzwords to justify a speculative bet. They'll say they are investing in a company because it is a disruptive play on the AI-powered cloud-based IoT synergy. This sentence sounds impressive, but it is devoid of any real meaning or understanding. It is an intellectual smokescreen to hide the fact that the investor has no idea how the business actually works. They are investing in a collection of buzzwords, not a tangible business. A classic example is the investor who buys into a small pharmaceutical company based on a press release about a successful Phase 1 trial for a new drug. They likely have no understanding of the brutal odds of drug development. The vast majority of drugs that succeed in Phase 1 fail in later stages. They don't understand the chemistry, the regulatory pathway, or the competitive landscape of the disease the drug is meant to treat. They have simply latched onto an exciting science fiction narrative of a miracle cure, and they are gambling, not investing. This tendency is magnified in industries that are inherently unpredictable. The 99% love to try and predict the price of commodities like oil or gold. They'll create elaborate theories based on geopolitics, central bank policies, or arcane chart patterns. They fail to recognize that these are global markets influenced by literally millions of variables, making any short-term price prediction a pure guess. Buffett, by contrast, has always said he has no idea what the price of oil will be next year. So instead of guessing, he invests in the toll booths of the industry, like pipelines or railroads that get paid regardless of the commodity's price. He invests in the predictable infrastructure, while the 99% gamble on the unpredictable commodity itself. This behavior is driven by a deep-seated desire to feel smart and in the know. It's more intellectually stimulating and provides a better story to tell at a cocktail party to say you've invested in a cutting-edge nanotechnology firm than to say you've invested in a company that makes bricks. The allure of the esoteric is powerful. It creates a sense of being part of an elite group that understands the future. The disastrous consequence of this approach is a portfolio built on a foundation of ignorance. When you don't truly understand what you own, you have no logical basis for your decisions. You don't know when to buy more, and more importantly, you don't know when to sell. When the stock of your complex biotech company falls by 50%, you have no way of knowing if it's a temporary setback and a buying opportunity, or if the fundamental story has broken and you should cut your losses. Your only guide is emotion, fear when it goes down, greed when it goes up. This leads to the classic value-destroying behavior of buying high and selling low. The simplicity of the circle of competence is not just an investment filter, it's a behavioral anchor. It ensures that your decisions are grounded in logic and understanding, not in the shifting sands of emotion and hype. The direct financial connection between staying within your circle of competence and building wealth is arguably the most important of all: the avoidance of catastrophic loss. The game of long-term investing and compounding is not primarily about hitting home runs. It's about not striking out. A single catastrophic loss, a 50, 60, or even 90% decline from which a stock never recovers, can do irreparable damage to a portfolio's long-term return. Consider the math of compounding in reverse. If you lose 50% of your capital, you need to achieve a 100% gain just to get back to even. The zero is a powerful and dangerous number in finance. The circle of competence is the ultimate defense against hitting zero. By refusing to invest in businesses whose futures are wildly uncertain or whose technology is beyond your comprehension, you dramatically reduce the probability of owning the next dot-com flameout or biotech failure. You are systematically eliminating the riskiest and most speculative part of the market from your universe of possibilities. This risk management principle is directly reflected in the volatility of your portfolio, often measured by its standard deviation or beta. A portfolio filled with speculative, complex companies will exhibit wild swings in value. This high volatility is not just psychologically taxing, it's financially destructive. It causes investors to panic sell at the bottom and greedily buy at the top. A portfolio built on simple, understandable, durable businesses like Coca-Cola or a regulated utility will have a much lower volatility. Its path upwards will be steadier and less dramatic, which allows the investor to stay the course and let compound interest work its magic. Lower volatility leads to better long-term returns precisely because it promotes better investor behavior. Furthermore, the circle of competence directly impacts your ability to perform an accurate valuation. To determine if a stock is a good investment, you must first estimate the future cash flows of the underlying business. If you are investing in a business you don't understand, this is an exercise in pure fantasy. How can you project the cash flows of a software company for the next 10 years if you don't understand its competitive advantage or the pace of technological change in its industry? You can't. Any valuation you perform will be garbage in, garbage out. However, if you are analyzing a simple, predictable business, like a company that sells candy or beer, projecting future cash flows becomes a much more reasonable and reliable exercise. The range of potential outcomes is far narrower. This ability to value a business with a reasonable degree of confidence is what allows you to buy with a margin of safety, the final and most crucial pillar of the inevitables framework. The simplicity of the business is the bedrock upon which a sound valuation can be built, and a sound valuation is the only true protection against overpaying and suffering a permanent loss of capital. A masterpiece of a business can be a terrible investment if you pay too high a price. This is the final critical pillar that ties everything together. Identifying a company with a fortress brand, an unbreakable customer habit, a toll booth economic model, and a simple-to-understand operation is only the first half of the equation. The second half, the part that requires immense emotional discipline, is waiting patiently for the opportunity to buy that wonderful business at a fair or even a wonderful price. Warren Buffett's career is a testament to this principle, but no story illustrates it more perfectly than his 1973 investment in the Washington Post Company. It was a decision made in the crucible of a brutal bear market, a time when fear had completely consumed Wall Street, and it became one of the cornerstones of Berkshire Hathaway's fortune. The setting was 1973-1974, a period of profound economic and social turmoil in the United States. The country was reeling from the Watergate scandal, the Vietnam War, and an oil crisis that had sent inflation soaring. The stock market was in a state of collapse. The Nifty 50 era, a time when investors believed you could pay any price for a great growth stock, had come to a screeching halt. High-quality stocks, once seen as invincible, were falling 50, 60, even 70%. The Dow Jones Industrial Average was decimated. The mood was one of deep pessimism. The consensus view was that stocks were a dangerous place to be, and cash was king. It was a time of fear, not greed. And for Warren Buffett, that was a signal to go shopping. He had been watching the Washington Post Company for years. He saw it not just as a newspaper, but as an inevitable. It had a dominant fortress brand in one of the most important cities in the world. It had a deep, ingrained habit among its readership, who relied on it for their daily information. Most importantly, it had a powerful local toll booth. In the pre-internet era, if a department store, a car dealer, or a grocery store wanted to reach the affluent population of Washington, D.C., they had one essential place to advertise: the Washington Post. The company had a virtual monopoly on local advertising, giving it incredible pricing power. It was also a simple business to understand. Buffett saw it as an economic franchise of the highest order. In 1972, the company's stock had traded for about $38 per share. But in the depths of the 1973 bear market, the stock price collapsed. The entire market value of the Washington Post Company, which owned the newspaper, Newsweek magazine, and several highly profitable television stations, fell to just $80 million. Buffett did the math. He knew, from reading the company's financial reports and from his understanding of the media business, that the company's assets were worth, at a bare minimum, $400 million. He might even have argued they were worth far more. Yet, here was the stock market, in its infinite wisdom and short-term panic, offering to sell him this incredible collection of media assets for $80 million. He was being offered the chance to buy a dollar bill for 20 cents. He didn't hesitate. Between 1973 and 1974, Berkshire Hathaway invested nearly $11 million to acquire a large stake in the company. To the outside world, buying a newspaper stock during a recession and a market crash seemed foolish. But Buffett wasn't buying the stock market. He was buying a piece of an extraordinary business at an absurdly low price. He was exercising the discipline of patience. The investment was a staggering success. Over the next few decades, that $11 million investment would grow to be worth over $1 billion. It was a more than 100-fold return, a testament to the explosive power of combining a truly great business with a deeply discounted price. It proved that the final promise of wealth building is unlocked not just by identifying the inevitables, but by having the courage and discipline to buy them when they are on sale. The psychological principle that governs this final pillar is the emotional battle against one of the most powerful forces in the market, the manic-depressive personality that Buffett personifies as Mr. Market. This brilliant allegory, first introduced by his mentor Benjamin Graham, is the key to understanding the emotional discipline required for value investing. Mr. Market is your hypothetical business partner in a private enterprise. Every day, he shows up at your door and offers to either buy your shares or sell you his, at a price he quotes. The crucial thing about Mr. Market is that he is a lunatic. On some days, driven by wild optimism, he quotes a ridiculously high price for your shares. On other days, consumed by fear and despair, he offers to sell you his shares for a fraction of their true worth. You are under no obligation to trade with him. You can ignore him completely. A rational investor will happily sell to him when he is euphoric and eagerly buy from him when he is despondent. The fatal mistake that most people make is allowing Mr. Market's mood to influence their own. When he is screaming with excitement, they feel greedy and buy at the peak. When he is weeping in the corner, they feel terrified and sell at the bottom. This behavior is driven by the herd bias, our deep-seated instinct to follow the crowd. In our evolutionary past, sticking with the tribe was essential for survival. Going off on your own was dangerous. This instinct is hardwired into our brains, and it serves us poorly in financial markets. When everyone else is selling, our brain screams at us that there must be a good reason, that we need to sell too to avoid being left behind. It takes immense emotional fortitude to stand apart from the herd and buy when everyone else is panicking. The 1973 investment in the Washington Post was a masterclass in resisting the herd. The entire financial world was stampeding for the exits, and Buffett calmly walked in and started buying. He was able to do this because he had divorced his own assessment of the business's value from the market's daily quote. The other psychological demon at play is action bias, our tendency to feel that we must be doing something, anything, rather than sitting still. In investing, this manifests as a constant need to trade, to check stock prices, to react to every news headline. Patience is a rare and valuable commodity. The discipline to identify a wonderful business and then wait for months or even years for Mr. Market to offer a silly price is incredibly difficult. Most investors can't stand the inactivity. They get bored and end up buying a mediocre business at a fair price rather than waiting for a great business at a wonderful price. Buffett's approach is that of a patient predator. He does his homework, identifies his targets, and then sits and waits, holding cash, until the perfect opportunity presents itself. This ability to conquer the emotional tides of Mr. Market, to overcome the pull of the herd and the itch of action bias, is the final and perhaps most difficult skill that separates the amateur speculator from the professional wealth builder. The blueprint for applying this pillar of patience and price is a mental model we can call the three-tiered buy list. This is a systematic way to turn market volatility from an enemy into a servant, allowing you to act rationally when others are panicking. Step 1. Identify a list of 10 to 15 inevitable businesses that have passed all your previous tests. They are inside your circle of competence, they have durable moats, and you would be thrilled to own them for the long term. This is your universe of high-quality stocks. Step 2. For each company on this list, you must perform a conservative valuation to determine its intrinsic value. This doesn't have to be a complex discounted cash flow model down to the penny. It can be a simple, conservative estimate based on earnings power or a multiple of free cash flow. The goal is to arrive at a reasonable, central estimate of what the entire business is worth. Let's say you determine that Company X is worth approximately $100 per share. Step 3 is where the discipline comes in. You will now create 3 price tiers for each stock on your list. The first tier is the fair price. This might be around your intrinsic value estimate, say $100 per share. At this price, you would be willing to start a small position, but you're not getting a huge bargain. The second tier is the great price. This is where a significant margin of safety appears. This might be 20 to 30% below your intrinsic value estimate, for example, at $75 per share. If the stock reaches this level, you will buy more aggressively. The third and final tier is the fat pitch price. This is the price that only appears during times of extreme market panic or a company-specific crisis, like the Washington Post in 1973. It might be 50% or more below your intrinsic value estimate, for example at $50 per share. You must pre-commit that if the stock ever reaches this level, you will invest with maximum conviction, buying as much as you responsibly can. By creating this tiered, premeditated shopping list before times a market downturn, you are taking the emotion out of the decision. You are no longer asking, "The market is crashing, what should I do?" Instead, you are simply executing a rational plan you made when you were calm and clear-headed. When the news headlines are screaming, "Sell," your checklist says, "Buy aggressively at the great price." This framework turns a chaotic market event into a simple, if-then proposition. It is the practical application of Buffett's famous advice to be fearful when others are greedy, and greedy when others are fearful. It provides the structure needed to stand apart from the herd and build a portfolio of the world's best businesses at prices that all but guarantee superior long-term returns. The antithesis of this disciplined, price-sensitive approach is the plague of FOMO-driven investing that infects the 99%. This is the behavior of chasing stocks simply because they are going up. The investor sees a stock that has doubled in the last 6 months and feels a desperate fear of missing out on further gains. They abandon all valuation discipline and buy at any price, justifying it with the narrative that this time is different or that the company is a paradigm shifter. The poster child for this behavior was the dot-com bubble, but it repeats in every market cycle. In 2020 and 2021, investors piled into so-called story stocks, companies with exciting narratives but often no profits and astronomical valuations. They weren't buying a business, they were buying a lottery ticket, hoping someone else would come along and pay an even higher price for it. This is not investing, it is speculation, a game of musical chairs where the 99% are almost always the ones left standing when the music stops. When the market's sentiment inevitably shifted, these stocks collapsed by 80 to 90%, inflicting life-altering losses on those who had bought near the top. Another common mistake is an inability to distinguish between a great company and a great stock. There are many wonderful companies in the world that are consistently and justifiably trading at very high valuations. The 99% often make the mistake of assuming that because the company is great, the stock must be a good buy at any price. They forget that price is what you pay, and value is what you get. Paying too high a price for even the best company in the world can lead to years or even decades of poor returns. For example, an investor who bought Coca-Cola stock at its peak in the late 1990s, when market euphoria was at its height, had to wait over a decade just to get back to even though the underlying business continued to perform well. The business was great, but the starting price was too high, leading to a decade of "dead money." A disciplined value investor understands that the goal is not just to own great businesses, but to own them at prices that provide a reasonable or even excellent expected rate of return. This flawed behavior is rooted in impatience and a desire for immediate gratification. The patient, disciplined work of valuation is tedious. Waiting for a fat pitch can be boring. It is far more exciting to be in the game, to be part of the action. The 99% treat the stock market like a casino, a source of entertainment and quick thrills. The professional treats it like a business, a place for the careful and rational allocation of capital. The disastrous consequence of the FOMO-driven approach is that it forces you to buy high and, because you have no valuation anchor, to panic and sell low. It is the perfect recipe for destroying wealth. It is the polar opposite of the value investing philosophy, which systematically forces you to do the reverse. By refusing to overpay, no matter how wonderful the company or how exciting the story, you protect yourself from the single biggest source of investment failure: paying too much. The direct financial connection between price discipline and wealth building is encapsulated in one of the most powerful concepts in all of investing: the margin of safety. Coined by Benjamin Graham, this is the cornerstone of all value investing and the ultimate protector of capital. The margin of safety is the difference between the intrinsic value of a business and the price you pay for its stock. If you've calculated that a business is worth $100 per share and you buy it for $60, you have a $40 margin of safety. This buffer is your protection against the uncertainties and errors that are inherent in any investment analysis. Perhaps your growth estimates were too optimistic. Perhaps the company faces an unexpected setback. The margin of safety ensures that even if things don't go perfectly, you still have a high probability of earning a satisfactory return and a very low probability of suffering a permanent loss. Buying the Washington Post for a price that was 80% below your conservative estimate of its value is the ultimate margin of safety. This principle directly impacts your downside risk. A portfolio built with a significant margin of safety across all its holdings will be far more resilient during market downturns. While other stocks may fall 50 to 60%, your holdings might only fall 20 to 30% because they were already cheap to begin with. This preservation of capital during bear markets is the unsung hero of long-term compounding. It means you have more capital left to work with during the subsequent recovery, which dramatically accelerates your portfolio growth over a full market cycle. Finally, the margin of safety is the engine that supercharges your upside potential and long-term compound annual growth rate (CAGR). When you buy $1 of value for 60 cents, you have two sources of potential return. First, you get the future growth in the intrinsic value of the business, as it earns more money over time. Second, you get the potential return from the price of the stock eventually rising to meet its full intrinsic value. This re-rating of the stock by the market can provide a powerful, one-time boost to your returns. Finding a wonderful, growing business and buying it with a large margin of safety is the holy grail of investing. It is the mechanism that turns good returns into spectacular, wealth-creating returns. It is the final lock you must turn, the promise that protects you from your own mistakes and from the madness of crowds. Ensuring your journey toward financial freedom is built not on hope, but on a foundation of unassailable value. You have now journeyed through the 5 foundational pillars of Warren Buffett's most powerful investment principle. You possess the framework for identifying an inevitable business, a company protected by the fortress of a timeless brand, powered by the engine of an unchanging human habit, fortified by the moat of an economic toll booth, simplified by the clarity of the circle of competence, and acquired with the discipline of a margin of safety. This is more than just theory. It is a complete mental toolkit, a lens through which you can now view the entire world of business and finance with a new, profound clarity. You have the power to distinguish the permanent from the fleeting, the durable from the fragile. This knowledge, applied with patience, is the bedrock upon which true, generational wealth is built. But what we have assembled here is a powerful weapon, a single, precision-guided tool in a much larger arsenal. Identifying the what, the great business, is only the first dimension of the challenge. The true masters of this craft, the architects of lasting financial empires, understand that the when is just as critical. They have a deep, intuitive grasp of the hidden cycles of the market. the psychological tides that cause even the greatest companies on earth to go on sale. They know how to read the subtle signals of fear and greed, not just in the headlines but in the very structure of the market itself. They understand that a great business is a necessary condition, but a great price, offered up by a panicked market, is the catalyst that creates legendary returns. The video that is now appearing on your screen is the missing link. It is the bridge between identifying the target and knowing the precise moment to strike. It is the next piece of the map, the one that illuminates the terrain of market psychology and reveals the triggers for decisive action. What you have just learned is the science of business analysis. What that video holds is the art of market timing, not in the foolish sense of day trading, but in the profound, patient sense of exploiting the emotional cycles that govern all human endeavors. It connects the what to the when, transforming your powerful new tool into a fully integrated system for wealth creation. Most people will stop here, content with the knowledge they have gained. They will have the blueprints but lack the key to the construction site. But for those of you who are not merely curious, for those who see this as the blueprint for your own financial freedom, for those building a legacy, the next step is not an option. It is a necessity. Complete your arsenal. Master the cycles. Click and continue the ascent.